This was only last summer, before the quarantine, when life was a lot more normal. April, late night, and I went with my girlfriend on a date. The only place I can truly recall at the time is north of Settleford's conservation area in Missouri. We were just BSing and driving about. Since my girlfriend and I had been discussing having some fun, I had a plan to have an even better evening. Pulling over to the side of the road, I reached in and extracted this monstrous joint my pals and I had wrapped days before from out of a jacket pocket. I had just somewhat planned this. Though she had smoked a few times before, my girlfriend was shocked. We were looking for a lighter before we even had the joint lit, and I thought I had stuck it in my center console when my girlfriend says, "Almost, sweetheart." "Store the joint somewhere, right?" Immediately. Cop. "Here." Looking back, I spot what looks to be someone approaching my car. Far enough away at the time that it seemed exactly like a person, but something didn't quite sit right with me as I watched this figure approach my car. Assuming this was a cop, where was their vehicle? Why were they only haphazardly approaching the rear end of my car? Then I started to see more of its form and understood. It's most likely a Park Service staff member ready to bust us. Terrified. It was dark outdoors. Thus, keep in mind that I couldn't really have a good view till the form drew near. Then I saw the ears, the perky, erect dog ears, and what I thought of as a person seemed enormous and wide in the chest, like some sort of mutant bodybuilder. Something in my gut, right in the pit of it, warned me that something was wrong here. About 5 seconds, I had all these ideas as my eyes fixed on this approaching man walking very slowly on two legs toward the rear of my automobile. At the moment, my girlfriend was observing me and becoming really anxious. She asked me what was wrong. I urged her to look behind us and tell me, "What the devil is that?" She turns around simultaneously and we both start to yell. Right in this moment, the man approaching our car starts to sprint faster and drops down on all fours like some sort of beast. Not wasting a second, I toss the key into the ignition, put the car in drive, bang, and we are out of there exactly like that. I find it difficult to put into words what I specifically observed. For most of it, it was a huge shadow that most definitely resembled some form of beast. I hardly want to use that word either. It sounds too fictitious. Anything it was, I could tell you it was not human. Making stories for fun is not something I do, hence I have nothing to benefit from doing this. My girlfriend was with me also, so she could confirm my account is accurate. I'm not sure if aliens exist or if that's what this was, but I truly terrified when it descended on all fours like an animal. I mean, I still drive past that neighborhood today, and the memory of that makes me shiver even now. No, especially like that, close to a wetland. I don't try and pull off any deserted roads when I conduct the date night with my girl. Has this encounter affected my view of things that aren't human or monsters? Not particularly. It's not sufficient to knock me over the line into believing things like ghosts or anything else, even though I can't describe what occurred to me. I simply view it as an off-peak event and move past it. The only actually lighting we had at the time of this sighting was the meager moonlight found outdoors. And where this man was coming from, just one route existed. Whatever it was must have emerged from the swamp and tracked the road toward our car. Indeed, my automobile was still running. I had my brake lights on and the inside light on. Possibly that it was drawn to the lights. I'm not precisely sure whether it was even an animal. Again though, they always advise, believe your gut feeling. In that case, my gut felt negative. Negative, horrible, stay away. My partner clearly felt the same way, particularly when she began shouting and yelling at me to drive. I felt as though, had I hesitated and stayed there much longer, well, who knows what would have happened? I had no hurry in learning. The soldiers fighting the Vietnamese army had to deal with all kinds of weird objects found in Vietnam's jungles. Assuming you have spent any time at all hearing some of the events that occurred during that war, you are definitely familiar with many of the things. But I bet you were unaware of some of the horrific true tales told by some troops about huge canid creatures stalking the jungles at night, killing Vietnamese and US soldiers both. This was really common. There are many kinds of tunnels that were excavated below, some constructed by animals, others by Vietnamese to store goods and build traps for opposing soldiers. Still, these animals dug tunnels as well. At least one half platoon has reportedly found one of these tunnels later on while midnight hunting out possible Vietnamese soldiers who had escaped from a neighboring captured hamlet. Their discovery was a set of roughly 30-foot spanning tunnels with an average width of roughly 9 to 10 feet and a height of roughly 14 feet below the ground. These tunnels were quite sizable. They were even linked and kept leading far down into the ground. That is before these big jungle wolves attacked some of these soldiers, they refer to them. The Vietnamese even had a phrase for them, which directly translated as jungle dogmen. Like they did all the other animals of the jungle that threatened man directly, they knew about them and even lived with them. These animals were common for rising out of these big tunnels at night and hunting. This is when battle troops would come across them. After witnessing notable Vietnamese troops being shredded into pieces, these items were reported to the US troops. They had already discovered many dead bodies buried in portions of US military tunnels, as well as Vietnamese and civilian tunnels. Though images and descriptions of these entities were rare, many of the nearby residents knew them as creatures that just lived in sections of the jungle. These entities would also stalk and kill other great predators such monkeys, big cats, and any meat they could come upon. Remember that the Vietnam War consists of so many elements, torture, poverty, destruction, death, etc., that it is difficult to fit such a strange abstract notion like what I am reporting. It takes time, and you have to go to the appropriate individuals before you can get the actual facts of events that truly happened on. There are so many distracting elements and so many things cleaned off and buried throughout the years. Many accurate stories and sightings vanished with dead troops and time. However, if you're determined and perform the correct research, all the necessary information will be easily available from all the correct sources. Though I'm not precisely at ease disclosing my identity, on both US and Vietnamese sides, my wife's side as well as several close relatives who fought in the Vietnam War. Well, that's all it took to start the discussion once I could identify it to these people and show them some of the fascinating knowledge I know about cryptids. Furthermore, consider that these types of species were not all they could have found in the rainforests. The US troops were about to have a variety of nightmares. Sitting down with a pen and paper, penning down all the stories and reports these cousins of mine have to tell me will occupy an entire afternoon. Absolutely, both sides of people suffered awful acts of brutality committed on them in the name of war. The periods of war and destruction were extremely horrible. Though the main emphasis of the entire event is still on that, it's really unusual that you ever learn about some of the traps the Vietnamese placed for the soldiers. I'm merely using that as an illustration to highlight that over the sweep of more pertinent data, many of the little things, such as the accounts I'm reporting, have gotten swept away in time and forgotten about. I know that out of all the stories I heard concerning other things, not just these creatures, only a small segment had accounts of these particular species. So I couldn't really discover which parts of Vietnam these monsters were segregated to. And out of all the reports I have heard, only a tiny portion addressed these monsters in the tunnels. From what I have learned, particularly from some of my Vietnamese cousins, they were really wild-looking and roughly 5 to 6 feet in height. That is, as tall as a man. They essentially refer to them as jungle wild animals. They also usually behaved somewhat aggressively and territorial, although they were not always definitely hostile. I try and see the whole issue from a rather scientific standpoint. Though they're not these creepypasta savage werewolf types of monsters that many legends paint them out to be, at least to my knowledge, it is quite likely that there are Canaan humanoid beings. And from the stories I have heard, at least from my Vietnamese cousins, it seems to be about the same thing. I thus use the word coexisted. They seem to treat these creatures as any other big alpha predator found in the jungle. You respect them, even avoid them. Well, you could be a victim if you find yourself in the wrong place at the wrong moment. These cousins of mine are far into their 80s and have nothing to benefit from fabricating this nonsense. Since I have been somewhat close to my wife's side of the family, I have been gathering this kind of data since excellent relationships were not difficult to develop. But it only shows you, if you neglect to search for these missing specifics of a violent battle, they will be forgotten about eternally after many who saw the fight die away. For this reason, it is quite crucial for us researchers working on topics outside of science that science cannot definitely acknowledge. To get the responses we are looking for, we must go above and dive even deeper. Long ago, in the late 90s, I had bought an old property with a sizable dilapidated barn through a short sale. The home itself needed a lot of maintenance, a little rundown to put it mildly. Little did I realize there was a good reason this property had long been ignored. Although the property itself was not in horrible condition, to what I know, no one had been residing on it for years. Given its state, I suppose that was clearly visible. Actually, this location lay on the outskirts of the town I resided in. I was also intending to fix it and most likely try to resell it for some profit, as I had been routinely visiting this site to help it appear great. For record's sake, I am a 52-year-old man who has never engaged in any kind of unusual action before now. Every time I approached the rear of this house, where the barn stood, I would experience a terrible sensation akin to approaching catastrophe. At night, when I was on the porch, I would hear things in the bushes and in the trees. I would simply sort of pause to explore closely. Sometimes I could hear what seemed like a quite big dog sniffing in the air. It felt strange. I would never venture outdoors in some places, as I would feel as though someone was there, some kind of presence monitoring every step I was taking. Though long before I ever bought the plot of land with the decaying house and barn on it, there had been odd noises and activity around that region. I knew there was more to it than that. Although I had heard several tales of strange events occurring among neighbors and others in the region, I naturally never paid attention to such hogwash until I personally encountered it. It got quite severe one evening when I was working late on the rear porch. You are familiar with the basic fear instinct? How it grabs you when it just comes washing over you? It grabs your hand. I started to feel this terrible crawl all around. Though the closest I can tell you is that the idea of I'm being chased right now keeps coming up in my thoughts. I have no other response for it. I had to leave as I felt I was at risk. I believe I simply left the door open for perhaps 5 minutes after walking inside the house to get some more tools. I'm not sure what it was, but I started to hear something quite large approaching and near the house, like a pretty large animal or something. I could clearly hear something large sprinting from the brush toward the house. I'm not sure exactly from where it came from. But I merely walked by the rear door. It was approaching where I was. Though I had no idea what it was or what it was intending, it felt wrong. I stopped and turned toward the door, thinking whatever to burst straight through the open entryway. Never have I ever had anxiety like that take control. Not like it did in that instant. Almost as though I had to do my best to avoid an actual mental collapse right then and there. Every single one, it sounded like a damned moose charged out of the bush toward the porch. Suddenly, all noise stopped. Sitting there, I listened for anything with my hands still on my equipment. The crickets had even gone silent. There was just complete quiet. I heard a very weak, raspy breathing, quite heavy, not like a person, but rather something with really enormous and massive set of lungs. Whatever it was, I had felt as though it was waiting for me to retreat from drilling and nailing on the porch. Quickly and silently, I left the front door, climbing in my truck and leaving Dodge fast. Weeks passed before I felt at ease going back to the recently purchased land. Following that event, I suffered terrible dreams of this wolf creature breaking in the house, snatching me, and dragging me away into the wilderness, never to be seen again. And then my dream would fade. It was the same one running over and over every evening. In my dreams, this creature looked to be some terrible, upright, walking wolf. You would presumably refer to that as a werewolf. I knew this was a big animal based just on the weight it had and the sheer noise it produced from sprinting over the undergrowth to the house. It scared me enough to make returning difficult. Still, when I did return, it was in the morning hours with daylight and clear view. The houses outside smelled quite like dog pee, rather strong. It dawned on me then that my dreams were materializing. I simply recall believing that this is impossible. I have been getting these clear dreams of a werewolf type thing, and lately, I have smelled heavy dog urine all about the house. Like this beast which emerged from the forest. It now marks this house as its territory. It frightened me out far too much to want to keep working on this area as I had been. For the next several months, I thus paid a small 3-man crew to go out and complete the tasks for me. Periodically, I would follow up with them, ask whether they felt anything strange while working, and they would simply give me strange looks and tell me no. They obviously had no understanding what I meant. This set me on more edge. Everything I had come across that evening seemed to be aimed at me personally. Anything it was, it wanted me. It showed no interest in the house or the younger boys I had employed. I guess it was waiting for me to return to exhibit itself or whatever. It will not allow it the gratification of scaring me. I grew to see my dreams as a reality, that this entity was real and frightening me in them. My nightmares were a reality. After I asked them to finish up on the house and cut things short, I ended up selling the property soon after, taking a far lower profit in turn. If we're totally honest, though, I wanted to avoid handling it anymore. I never had any of these dreams once more afterwards. Never experienced any of the unusual and terrible feelings I did at first arrival on that site. That was over 20 years ago. I wish to keep those recollections as far in the past as I can manage. I appreciate your attentive listening. Let me first briefly describe the location, so you may completely grasp how this transpired before I go into further depth. The corn stalks of my grandfather aligned up opposite the road that paralleled his crop. On the other side of the road, a road running perpendicular ran straight into the parallel road. On one side of this perpendicular road stood another family's owned corn stalks, and then on the other side was denser woods. Imagine here an upside-down capital T. The T's flat section turned out to be my grandfather's corn stalks. The corn was on one side, the last woods was on another. I simply want to provide you a logical image that makes the most sense. Now, when I was very small, my grandfather owned acres of a cornfield, and I would play in constantly, One afternoon, my grandfather was dragging a trailer with all of his corn stalks and grain in it as I stopped to investigate a large beetle I had never seen before. Turning to find what it was, I saw some movement emanating from across the road. Seeing it too, my grandfather was standing there and waved to me that he believed it would be a large buck and what surfaced from the woods across the road. He gestured to the direction of the action, and we came upon this big hyena-looking thing emerging out of the wood line on its hind legs. It turned its head and looked at me when I spotted it. It then jumped and landed on the other side of the road into the corn stalks. It cleared the road one leap. I started to get terrified as it shot across the other side into the fields. Leaping atop the trailer, I waved my arms to draw in my granddad, who glanced and noticed it too. Then the thing surfaced from the corn once more. It paused, turned to face me, then veered to the side and went off on its hind legs, returning into the forest from where it had just come, instead of jumping like it had done before. Its arms seemed to be clutching a little animal. Maybe it had pursued a cat or something into the corn and was pulling it back when we had just happened to be just across the road from it. From the crops to the forest, the sting was quick to travel. I knew it was out there, clearly exposed. Smart indeed, it acted sensibly. In my lifetime, I had never seen anything like that. Gosh, that was so massive. Except for big bears and moose, I have never seen an animal this size before, especially one walking on its hind legs like a human would. Walking on its hind legs, it behaved neither ungainly or uncomfortable. It was as natural and fluid as it ought. I cannot, from how far out it was, I could just tell. I experienced trauma. I know that I would really never be the same, even if it took me a few years to overcome this trauma. I trembled. Even now, all these years later, I haven't completely understood it and haven't gotten over it since the day. Seeing it, my grandfather would not discuss it with me. He simply sat in total denial that these things even exist. I no longer need to witness one to find them believable. I know they are present right now. One afternoon, after a dentist visit, I chose to drive a long distance home to pass by a wilderness area, mostly consisting of old native territory. Though truth to be told, there was not much back here. The landscape was breathtaking. It was at this point that I experienced my life happening. I nearly drove a large black dog. I watched this figure dash across front of my automobile, looking exactly like a werewolf. It was running straight, just as a human would. Stop the car. I just stared at it as it swiftly passed over the road. In my life, I never had seen anything like that. Once it passed, I began to slowly start moving once I reached roughly 300 yards away from where it crossed. My rearview mirror showed me that it was peeping its head back from my car. The dog was quite big. It had a long snout, pointed ears, almost 8 feet of height, and a big chest. It sent out a howl unlike any I have ever heard when it crossed and hopped down the road. I felt tremors in my body. It seemed quite frightening. This sighting stayed on me until I got home. When I told my husband what had happened, he advised me to never visit that region once more, since it was considered to be a cursed site of dark magic and people have vanished from there. Apart from only missing folks, unusual loud metallic banging sounds, brilliant lights at night, figures moving in the sky and the woods have gone on in that area. Among the Bigfoot reports, I suppose that whole area serves as a hotspot for UFO sightings and interactions. Growing up here in the neighborhood, where I haven't been growing up, my husband and his buddies avoided that place like the plague, since others he knew went there and turned out missing. Not even many of the locals that reside nearby travel through that region very often. It kind of begs some questions. Well, I probably ought never to have drove through there. Had I not, I would not have witnessed such a wonder of an animal, if you could even call it such. I'm very happy I did. Though I personally don't think in werewolves or creatures like Bigfoot, I do think that there are monsters out there. Actually, I have a tale I could tell you, whereby I personally experienced a monster all of my own. One night, I left home alone, playing video games while my parents were away. A monster, what I thought of as such, tried to break into my house. Since that's the only way I could fairly characterize its appearance and actions, I called it monster. Actually, it was somewhat similar to that of a werewolf, but I attempted to be rational about it and came to see that werewolves aren't exactly genuine. Though I cannot deny that the monster I saw that night was most definitely real and had entered my house as it wanted to, I personally do not believe that anyone are turning into these things under a full moon. There is no telling if I would still be here today to tell you my story. We had a yard all around our house. Beyond there, on both sides, in the rear, was most likely about 3 acres of tiny forests, which immediately connected to a neighbor's house. The driveway leading to the road was straight before of the house, and towering hedges stood on the other side of the road. Had we not had as much solitude, perhaps we would have been more near to our neighbors, thus this might not have happened. Still in high school and 15 years old, this happened to me. Being a freshman, I guess I was either 14 or 15 actually. Usually not returning until very late, like after midnight, my parents left on a date night and often did not return. I was left at home thence to watch TV and engage in video game play. That is, activities typical of teenagers. My parents had a big screen TV in the living room, hence I hooked up my PS3 and started playing games through it. I will quickly sketch out our dwelling. The TV is straight to your left as soon as you enter the entrance door. The couch facing the TV is on your left. A big window runs perpendicular to the front door. From the outside, looking in this front window, you would have complete vision of the dining space, which sits rear behind the living room. If you stroll past the TV in the living room, you can head straight down the little corridor to my father's office and a little bathroom, as well as my parents' room. Turning left and following that path will send you down another little corridor leading to my bedroom and a tiny bathroom. The bedroom lies across from the living room. Thus, there is a wall there if I am in my bedroom facing the living room and the TV. Returning to the living room, the dining room is straight front of you as soon as you enter in the front door. In the kitchen, the turns inward, obstructed by a wall. This is what happened now that you roughly know what the house looks like. I stopped playing games and got up fast to grab some water. And I spotted something I hadn't before while I'm returning from the kitchen. Big red eyes looking at me through the window at night catch my attention. I simply lost it when I seen those eyes. I spun around and dashed back to lock myself in my bedroom. I was hyperventuring. Like a small child seeing a monster outside, I felt like. When I entered, though, I merely started slightly peering through the blinds. Knowing where I was, I didn't want to move the blinds very much. I so wanted not to move the window shades. I once more saw it then. It moved this time in line with trends. It tracked me to my bedroom and observed that I had entered the next bedroom over and crossed in front of my window. Given its large shadow, this object must have been 7 to 8 feet tall. Its tail, curling behind it, was lengthy. What I was staring at truly astounded me. I considered it as a werewolf even before I had seen it fully. Its shape let it stand out. Crapped for me, but I hid it after breaking my window blinds months ago from too much friend rustling. And my parents were enraged, hence they never bothered to replace it. They thus did not close nearly all the way, hence this monster had free license to completely investigate my windows straight ahead, and practically nothing I could do but try to hide in the corner from view. I turned off my lights and was hiding in the corner while this creature searched my room for me. What I was looking at truly astounded me. Even before I saw it completely, only by its outline, I assumed it was a werewolf. The head and its mane matched a werewolf you would find exactly. It stood straight on two legs and seemed to be massive. It had pointed ears like a dog and was covered in long dark fur, nearly matted fur. The eyes shone red, like a deep, dull red, and even possessed some yellow hue. Its visage greatly perplexed me, since it looked completely against knowledge. It leaned so near to the glass that the condensation was building up and you could see its breath on the window. I put my light off, hence I doubt it could see me. After a few minutes though, it drew back its head and strolled across to the opposite side of my house. Every time it moved, you could just hear this faint thud on the ground, so you could tell this thing was weighty. I leaped fast, shut my door, ran back and sat in the corner listening closely for whatever this beast was going to do next. My game stopped, and I could just faintly hear it then, silence for a moment. I listened and kept on listening. I then heard the backsliding glass door rattling. This monster was, horrifyingly, attempting to open the sliding glass door to enter the house. It was shaking even more violently, more and more violent every time. I started to cry. I was really terrified. I ran nowhere as I left my phone in the living room. Not one person I could remember. Uncertain about what to do, maybe 9:45 p.m. at the time, my folks wouldn't be home for a few more hours. I knew no one to get in touch with, not one thing I could do. I was a goner if this object broke within the house. It tried and tested at the door for some time before halting totally. Following that, I heard nothing at all. Unlike I could hear it walk all around the house, I did not even hear it walk away. Still sitting there motionless, just where I had left it, I heard my game. Just a faint noise. I resolved I would just sit there, waiting till my folks returned. Though I had no idea how long it would take, finally my mother and father returned home. Though it was just about 11 p.m., I felt as though I had been waiting for hours. They returned since my mother wished to cut their date short and has a tendency of arriving down with awful migraines. My mother fetched some aspirin when my father and she returned home, and they were wondering why I had locked myself in my bedroom with the lights out when I told them I thought I heard an intruder trying to break into the house. My father examined the rear door, where I told him I had heard someone trying to break in, but there were no indications. He looked at me quite oddly. The glass is not smudged or left with footprints, like I simply dreamed the entire thing. I have experience and know what I observed. I am no idiot, hence I wouldn't dare tell my parents this since they wouldn't believe me. That is still one of the most horrible things. Now, fast forward in time, and I am in my 20s and presently enrolled in college. Before then, I did not believe in monsters, but today I do, and I know for sure they are real. Little child, my mother used to have a large rose garden that resided in central Maine. Every spring, I would visit to observe how the roses appeared. It always seemed as though they were in full bloom. I believe, nevertheless, the rose garden drew something sinister. My mother would tell of spotting an unusual black dog prowling her garden late at night. She claimed it would push its face against the bottom-level house windows and stand on its hind legs that comprised our living room and kitchen. It would then hurry off and disappear. She called it an unusual-looking animal. Still, it didn't truly frighten her since it only made her far more conscious of what was around her. But my mother is a total night owl. One night at about 3 in the morning, she claimed to be in bed reading through the late-night infomercials on TV and noticed what first seemed to be a man seated on the top of her garden shed. She noted its pointed ears, big dog head, and lengthy nose. She added that it possessed fingers on its paws. She kept stressing how tall this thing was during the whole time she was talking about being on the roof. 6 feet, 7 feet, she truly could not explain it any other way. Then the very next day, my mother had a terrible encounter with 3 of these dogmen. Saying she assumed they were werewolves, they approached her while she was tending her garden. She knew without a doubt that these were the same species she's seen seated on her garden shed roof and the same species attempting to peep into our first floor windows. These terrible animals made her so afraid, she fled inside and locked the door. I have no memory of the incident as I was at school at that time. She bided her time until they went. She mentioned this a few days ago. She would hear these unusual, unidentified noises from the woodland area beyond the shed, both night and day. She thought these entities originated from here. We think these critters were communicating to one another with the sounds they produced. It sounded to me like clicking. Though they had a guttural tone to them and were not human-like at all, the sound seemed as though they were speaking to one another, very definitely in some capacity. She had heard them several times over the years, but never seen them once again. Following that last trip, when the 3 of them emerged from the forest behind the shed and walked towards her into her garden. Years ago, she started hearing unusual cries and guttural sounds once more, rather distinctively. Now later in life, she is starting to wish she could flee permanently. I will relate with you 3 distinct dogman encounters I have experienced. One time, while driving out close to Florida State's border, I came upon a dogman. At the time I was 18, I recently obtained my license soon before this. Eating on a cow co-ops late at night was late. Once I passed it, I noticed this object staring across at me. Suddenly, it sprang off the road and vanished into the weeds and trees. My first meeting with one of these species was just that. The second meeting I had was about 23 years oldish, laying in my bed, nodding off to sleep, when all of a sudden my room was really black. My head was exactly under my window, and my blinds were open. To obscure the light streaming in, something truly large loomed before my window. And I turned around at that same instant to saw this horrible thing staring across my window. It seemed human-like and resembled a tremendously tall dog on steroids. Its skull was big and its eyes gleamed a dull red. It then sent off a deep vibration, like to a bell, offset on my chest. I knew this had to be some kind of huge alpha predator or something. Though I laid there frozen in panic, the angle I was using failed to show me. I finally plucked the bravery to reach fast and close my window curtains without even looking. It was still there when I carried out this. I heard it making this strange clicking noise and felt as though it was planning a means of access into my house, but I quickly reached up and closed my blinds and am not sure whether it noticed me or not. Wild and without hearing anything anymore, I somehow or another fell back asleep. My shades down gave me a false sense of protection. It was most likely several hours before I could turn off my thoughts from pure anxiety and tiredness. I had one last and final dogman meeting just last year. This beast ran over the road I live on, and I came close to a lengthy dirt road leading back country. That night I was traveling and had to stop to take a piss. I got back in my truck and started to pull out when I spotted this thing. Right off the road, it was on its hind legs and clutching onto this fallen tree. About 6 feet wide, the area that led out to this little patch of trees was. Pulling itself up on its hind legs seemed ridiculous, but after I had a close look, I knew what it was. I backed gradually, looking at my truck as though it was sizing it. I stayed cool and stayed on the brake. This thing is huge, and it felt as though I was under careful observation, since it seemed as though its future movement could be highly planned. I tried flashing my brights at it to divert it, but it simply seemed to irritate the creature more than it already was. Deciding I shouldn't make a fool of myself, I peeled out from there and shot down the road. Luckily for me, I could see this monster neither on my trail nor following me. All the same, those are my interactions. Though that's all that happened, I'm sorry they're not more in depth. I know dogmen are real, hence nobody can say me they do not exist. These are actual living entities existing somewhere. You simply had to be aware of them and steer clear of them wherever possible. At my job, I have to get up quite early, between 3 and 4, and work really long shifts. My wife and I have to try and schedule extra early for date evenings since I sleep so early. We were returning from town this evening, especially when I decided to stop. We simply sat there and discussed issues in our relationship for a long time. I told her I was starting to get really weary and maybe she wouldn't mind if I had a brief cat nap. She said that was okay. I decided it would be better before we returned to my father's place. I passed out and my wife sat there on her phone, hand on mine, cuddled somewhat as I slept. Then, late at night, my wife noticed this large dog-like creature crossing the road. We were using my dad's F-150 at the time as the alternator on my truck was running. Just a little while from the home, his pickup was parked off the road. My wife claimed it had long muzzle and red eyes. She claimed it was quite stooped down and dragging its feet. She looked at it fairly well. She tells me she just noticed this monster travel across the road into a large vacant field when she wakes me. She claims she never has seen anything like it before, and she does not believe in dogmen. I have only ever heard of them, but she appeared quite truly afraid of what she witnessed. She said it truly freaked her out, but it didn't notice her truck or us sitting in it. We headed straight back home, nearby. This is where my wife at last was able to tell my dad she had changed her experience, yet he did not trust her and thought she was seeing something else. He adds, "The dark fools your eyes, but I think she is a 100." She pulls out a thorough sketch of what this object looked like the next morning. My wife is a highly meticulous and amazing artist, by the way. I still find her sketch difficult to accept. The fact none of us have ever seen an animal like this before shocks me most. Her sketched creature featured long back legs, no tail, and a completely fur-covered body. That makes sense. The thing looked like a dog or a wolf with a human-like head and face, rather than a whole canine or human face. The matted fur and deep-set eyes gave that impression. She showed my father and me this, is what she observed. She spent late last night sketching since she found it so distracting. The sketch bothers me, but once more, my father simply believes she had a horrible dream or saw something in the dark and dismisses all else. This happened to me back when I was 17. About 4.5 miles down a dirt road, close to the very end where there is a sizable undeveloped cul-de-sac, I hiked with a friend. Suddenly, jolts my friend, who begins to worry, asking, "What is that?" "You are just tripping out," I kept telling him. He would whisper to me that someone is watching us and was attempting to stop me. He was actually becoming spooked out, but I advised him to stop thinking he was simply trying to spook me. This friend of mine is a large, burly guy, not particularly terrified of nothing. To be honest with you, it was weird, but at the moment, it was more irritating than anything else. About 10 minutes more of strolling revealed massive branch cracking and collapse close by. I started to get afraid at that point. We chose to reverse. I could see something following us as we were returning. We both shivered in terror. After a minute of peace, this thing sprang out behind us, around 50 feet away, and fixed us squarely. We both started sprinting back down this road, leading to a turn in the road. This enormous 8-foot-tall wolf creature emerged out of nowhere. It didn't pursue us, but my friend and I kept turning back to make sure it wasn't trailing or approaching. It observed us just now. Right out of a movie, it appeared to be a werewolf. It was towering and somewhat black in hue. It possessed a long nose, long ears, and long hair. I cannot recall seeing any teeth or eyes or anything else. I was so terrified that I most likely distorted a lot of stuff out anyhow. We turned around and my one buddy had urinated all over himself. Though we were so afraid that none of us was laughing, it was humorous in a sort of sense. He never mentioned that day ever again, and I doubt we told anyone else either. Whose belief would we then have? One day, I was alone in the woods with my dog, listening to Spotify and appreciating the beauty in the trees. I decided to go search for any interesting pine cones or perhaps arrowheads alongside my dog. Alone in the woods, you never know what you could come across. Searching for animal bones, skulls, ribs, everything I can gather is my favorite. I was in this vast backlot area beside a pretty sizable apartment complex with a piece of woods extending far out and on continuous length. I'm not sure for just how long. About 30 feet distant, I was going around this back lot when I started to hear sticks breaking in the tree line down further from me. I was ready to head down to check more great stuff. I spun around and peered in the path of the sound. Then I noticed some massive branches and brush motion. I could plainly see something really large moving the tree and in the brush next by. Right next to the tree line, the grass and weeds were also trembling furiously, as if something were rattling inside of them. It terrified me out. Honestly, hence I chose to fast turn around the path I had taken. My dog is now afraid and was whimpering as I'm walking back. The rattling and rustling in the bushes is going insane. Looking down as I'm fast reversing, I find something quite disturbing. I did locate tracks, in fact. I'd never seen them originally, as I did not come in this manner. 2 sets of tracks, both really big ones that I discovered, were just roughly 20 feet apart overall and much apart than the first set. Walking bipedally for at least half the time they showed on the ground, the traces were large canine tracks that swung back and forth from 4 tracks to 2. Both sets of the traces resembled this, and they both led straight to the shaking source. And they headed exactly in that direction, that of trees. Not about to be devoured by a ravenous wolf is me. Thanks, no. Last year, I went hiking in Southern California and came upon something either a wolf or large German shepherd. Though I have heard them occasionally around here, I never seen one before. People have called them wolf headmen since they have a wolf-like head. Though my family and friends call them that, I am not sure if that's their official name. Most of my family has seen them plenty of times and knows about them. Actually, a few weeks back, close to a lodge I visit regularly with some friends, I even heard some howling just before dusk. Since then, I have heard lots more howling, though. They seem to be scattered around my neighborhood. Though I try to avoid particular wooded areas near me and hear as much as I can, I constantly feel as though they are about. Like possibly a sizable pack of them. Occasionally I hear them at night, howling really loudly. Though these screams sounded much deeper and louder, It reminds me of wolf howls you can hear in the woods. You can tell the volume from a larger animal, much bigger lungs, guttural, a far deeper growl alone. Their highly disruptive screams are quite upsetting. As it hangs about the neighborhood, I worry it will show itself more and more the longer it. Like other animals, they develop braverness. Consider a cougar to be one. They hunt till every meal is gone. They then come into touch with those seeking more and develop bravery. They then launch personal attacks. Still, I hail from a little town where everyone knows one another, hence reputation is quite important. I'm not ready to publicly advocate about it, in my opinion. Though they're bad in this area, even my family keeps it hidden. Though I'm not crazy, others believe I am. I am not insane, though. I'm not going to be terrified of the woods, as I do know something weird resides there. I definitely don't want to run across such monsters being out there, and you cannot tell me they are absent if I am merely avoiding visiting some areas in the woods where these things live. Actually, one time my friend told me about how he observed one of these objects strolling up close to his residence just outside of Santa Barbara up in the hills. He drove me to his residence. He had recently purchased a younger house and the location where he noticed this thing 1 week following his initial viewing. Though I'm not sure whether he told anyone else about this, I believe walking on his land, he informed me when he seen this object, he set out to try to find it. He most likely could follow it perhaps 50 feet up a steep, rocky hill, but then he heard this loud howl accompanied by a scent from rotting meat. He assumed it might have been a too big coyote or dog, but as he approached closer, the tracks turned and bipedally into the forest from where he lost sight. Though perhaps he was inquisitive, I'm not sure if it was the appropriate call for him to try and track it down. He seemed insane for it and should have avoided in case it was nearby. Given that it was the same howl I had heard, down to the T of the description, his description of the howl to me kind of made me wither. He described the ear-shattering loudness of it. Many stay somewhat quiet about this sort of behavior. Based on what they hear, people may be afraid, but their true fear stems from what they do not know is happening. Although my region of residence and his is not far distant, it is somewhat thickly inhabited around here. But I really doubt that my family and friends are the only ones around here hearing these things, howling noises, seeing these things. Before these events begin to be public, we have to act fast. Past my house lies a section with lots of antique deer stands. Nobody has ever hunted back there in my memory. It has a spooky quality. Every time I have gone back there, I get the shivers and I picture a large creature prowling about. People fearing they will be taken back there late at night are staying indoors. Perhaps that's only my inner horror movie interpretation. Originally, though, until my ideas started to literally become a nightmare. Having viewed too many horror movies, I used to believe I was simply too scared. Then I came upon the biggest straight-walking coyote I had ever seen. It was huge, and I could see its tops over its head. From its eyes, it was glowing terrible yellow. Until I saw it clearly in front of me eating the deer, I really thought it was some kind of werewolf or wolf guy. Though I'm not sure precisely what it was, I can tell you that whatever it was seemed far more angry and bigger than a normal coyote. This item originated, I believe, from the neighboring creek where many deer gather and sip water. First, I noticed it when I was back there investigating and considering all the eerie, Silent Hill-like events occurring in this section of the forest with the abandoned stands in them. From the direction the creek runs, I could hear a lot of disturbance. I was thus intrigued and went a bit further to look at. That's when I first spotted it, this enormous coyote-looking monster attacking and killing this deer while it was drinking at the creek. What I was seeing stunned me. Not even more than a few seconds of staring at this beast, I could hear it clicking as it was chowing down this dead deer. It had most likely been there for perhaps 20 seconds. It then halted. Frozen in total and utter dread, I felt it would kill me next. Still, it peered slowly at me. I heard it put out this ugly, god-terrible snarl. Turning, I sprinted as rapidly as I could to stand clear of there. This item seemed to have read my mind and ideas almost exactly. Looking at its expression alone, I simply recall thinking, werewolf. It looked to be really tall and menacing. At first I didn't know what to make of it, but then I realized, should I fail to leave immediately, I will be its next meal. God, with very hairy and matted fur, it truly did like a big, upright, walking coyote. Though off-white with a long nose, it was so large in a gray-white tint. It was damp as well, appearing to have crept out of the water and attacked this weak doe. The whole event has left me spooked out so terribly that, at least as I used to, I avoid returning there exploring. Later on, I started to truly consider things carefully. Perhaps there is a reason people no longer hunt back there. I have no idea. Although there are other places with abandoned tree stands, I cannot precisely convey to you the sensation that section of the forest provides. Simply said, it makes my skin crawl returning there. Then I go to see that coyote thing, and it sealed the deal for me. Do you suppose a sizable werewolf-type beast is wreaking havoc on the backcountry areas? Not entirely. I wish to avoid entirely. So do I believe there is a big unknown predator there that looks and resembles a werewolf? Surely, years ago, I volunteered to perform some local Forest Service work. One day, I was 17 or 18 years old and instructed to remove some tougher undergrowth in this isolated spot for trail improvement. We had so few volunteers, hence, this day I was the only one working on the ship. I was alone, totally by myself. Young as I was somewhat conceited and certain of my surroundings. How incorrect I was. I had not even been among the brush for more than an hour when I first noticed the tops of these big ears in the surrounding trees. These huge pointed ears exceeded any I had ever seen. Then whatever it was looking at me through and behind the trees. I looked back at these brilliant yellow eyes. From where I was standing, whatever I was looking at seemed to be well over 6 feet tall. The eyes nearly had hypnotic quality. You seemed to have fallen into them practically. They penetrated my spirit. Like I was being pulled away from my work to come closer, whatever these eyes were related to. I felt as though the energy from the eyes impacted me. I thought I was in a trance under the direction of a puppet to a puppeteer. Not realizing it until I came out of it, I found myself almost walking toward them and turned aside. I felt merely absolute horror in that instant, the clinging thrall on me gone. That much so I was too terrified to move. I recovered control and turned, sprinting as fast as I could to let my supervisor know what was happening. Running back to the main section of the trail where I was which was a dead end, in the area, I started to hear something quite large trailing closely behind me. Stopped dead in my tracks, I listened. At that, I heard a howl yell. It was strong enough that I could really feel it. If I'd moved, I would have been demolished like if I were made of metal. It felt rather near, and I could sense something behind me getting ready. Turning around to find what it was, I saw a monstrosity of a being just having emerged from the trees behind me. It had the most terrible-looking eyes, a head size more than I could have imagined, and height above a man. It was the same thing that tried to entice me away. It didn't seem particularly glad that I broke away from its trance. It pursued me on this road and simply seemed so enraged that I avoided it. Hands with long claws and a face somewhat like a wolf, but ugly if that makes any sense. It had big erect ears, precisely as I first saw behind the trees. Whatever it was covered behind the trees trying to draw me in, I knew I was now totally seeing this thing in the flesh. That was the beast, eyes searching my body up and down as if waiting for me to make the next movement. It stood there, gazing me up and assessing me. And right at that very time, I hear my supervisor in a golf cart approaching me. She was headed this way, just around the bend, descending the trail. This thing turns its instant focus to the sound of the golf cart, then turns and looks back at me, glances back again at the coming sound, then, in a split second, dashes back onto the woodline on the other side of the trail, producing a loud smashing sound. I basically ruined my trousers, and not even 10 seconds after my boss appears on view. She looked astonished when she saw me on this side of the trail, and even stopped to ask me what I was doing here and why I wasn't down on the other side, so completing cleaning the brush. I spoke little, but I told her I felt sick and I thought I should go. She was not buying it, as I could tell, but she continued telling me, "Are you sure? You do have quite light complexion. You seem ill." Safe to say that after that, I departed and never volunteered for wildlife services ever once more. About 11 p.m. one evening, when I was roughly 10 years old, my dad arrived home late. Sleeping, my mother was laying on the couch, waiting for him to return home. When my dad arrived to the house, he saw something staring at him from the side window and side door. The light he turned on the front porch swiftly disappeared from sight. I should not say turned on exactly. On the front porch sits a motion light detector. This must have therefore moved from the light when he first entered view. My sister comes screaming down the corridor, white as a ghost, and says, "Dad, Mom, there's a big monster outside my window." Dad is on full alert, believing it's an intruder entering the house, and before he could say anything, her bedroom window faces the far side of the house, exactly where the object purportedly was. That's exactly what my dad noticed. Getting his weapon, my dad informed us he pulled it from the closet. Demand whatever this was to show itself, or he was going to make it look like, he opened the rear door and yelled, and fired a shot into the heavens. Really cheesy, but occasionally my father gets this superhero complex about him where I feel like he has to regurgitate cliched action movie lines just to quell his anxiety. He shined his lights about but saw nothing. I, my mom, and my sister were all on great alert and freaking out. Actually, my dad and sister saw something. We heard someone moving the front yard as my dad was outdoors looking at the rear. When my mother finally looked out the window, we noticed it was not a person, but rather a big wolf-like thing staring directly back at us with these filthy, amber-colored yellow eyes. Like it hadn't eaten in days, it looked gaunt and dead, sunken in face and very skinny. Though it was shattered and malformed, it did not seem to be in agony. Saying that was front of the house, my mother hurried to the rear to yell for my dad while my sister and I started to scream. The darn item is gone once more as my dad rushes back into the house, all the way to the front. Like small children, my sister and I rushed and hid in my parents' room under a large comforter covered in... It was terrible. My dad most likely spent the greater half of the next 2 hours walking the whole outside of our house, looking for this creature, shining his lights at any given moment, pointing his rifle. My mom was freaking. We hadn't seen it anymore. So after some time, he gave up and entered. He kept the gun close by just in case it returned. Though they tried, he and my mother barely slept. They slept in the living room. At some time, my sister and I dozed out under the comforter. We were holding each other. We simply did not discuss it the following morning, and later, I have never brought it up as a family. Still, my sister kept questioning my dad the following day. "Last night, Dad, what was that? What was what we observed? That creature was of what kind? From where did it come?" My dad turned away from the questions. Just changing the topic, my mother advised us not to talk about such things. We moved out some year after. We never had an experience like that before. Thinking back on this genuinely is frightening. Not long after I turned 21, I thought I spotted a Dogman. I don't recall the precise location after spending a long weekend partying with some pals outside of Cincinnati, but it was along the highway close by and most likely directly next to the railroad lines. It paused in its tracks. Then it was on all fours staring at me. It appeared to be staring straight into my eyes, but as it did, I had an intense anxiety that grabbed hold of me. I tried not to stray from its stare. It did look really hideous. Looking at it for a few more seconds, I decided that this was a Dogman, a creature of malicious intention. Looking in the face, it was rather humanoid. I slowed down to see this monster staring back at me, like we were supposed to be making eye contact. I then accelerated and this thing followed behind my vehicle. I pressed on the gas hard till I was traveling maybe 80 to 90 miles an hour, with this creature rushing after me, almost catching up with me. I was worried it would catch up with me and drag me out of my car. It then simply pauses in the center of the road, gets up on two legs, and then watches me as my car moves farther and farther away, so separating me from this monster. From my rearview mirror, I see this all occurring. To be honest, in my whole life, one of the most weird events I have ever experienced. Until I discovered Dogman later on in life, I had no idea such species even existed. I still find great resonance in it. I can't help but wonder now that there are things out there that society strangely regards as non-existing when friends joke about folklore and Bigfoot. Like werewolves or dogmen, whenever I watch creatures in movies nowadays, I sort of want to believe they exist. Call it whatever you desire. I can't get rid of the impression that this creature was trying to murder me, even with the smallest trace of a link. I still have this memory frequently, hence I was quite terrified. I have lately come to terms with it as part of myself. I aimed my .22 rifle at one of these Dogman things earlier this winter. Most likely a really dumb idea, and I nearly killed myself. With their lofty ears, massive skulls, and enormous sets of fangs, these Dogmen are frighteningly beautiful. The one I aimed at stood really tall, 8 feet. To try to discourage it away from entering my trailer, I fired another shot at its shoulders after one of its ribs. If they so wished, they seemed to be able to cut me wide open. Still, I not gave a damn. I wanted to get it outside my trailer. Though it seemed to discourage it temporarily, I realized a meager hollow point would not help this animal. I felt as though I was being watched and followed everywhere I turned around the exterior of my trailer during the next 3 days. One Dogman especially, the one I thought to be the leader male of a pack, was hunting me. He was dark and really huge. The same one I had fired at seemed to keep returning behind the house. It was incredibly broad, strong, and really looked like a live killing machine. I aimed at him with my .22 once again, but it didn't appear to affect him. Not even somewhat disturbed was my firing rounds into it. The rounds seemed to have done hardly any damage at all. It persisted. I hid inside my trailer for the evening. Though I knew it was waiting for me, I never gave it the gratification of heading outdoors to meet it. The next day, I began to notice unusual sounds and activities surrounding my trailer. That day, the dogs all throughout my property started to act erratically on a consistent basis. They were trotting between my trailer and the deep forest back and forth. Not acting unusual the few nights before, they had been acting peculiar the entire day. They knew, indeed. Whenever these beings were there, they knew. Though it's worse than that, they could smell it, and these objects smelled like blood and dog. It is rotting. Not even, could I say it to you? I was on edge all day, waiting for this thing to manifest itself once more, like it had. I knew it would be. All you experience in the pit of your stomach is this anxiety that something is about to happen. Simply said, you are not sure when. Imagine being blinded and tied up. You never know when. I know someone is going to just stab you. I knew. Strange comparison, however, that's the best I could think of. Although I'm not sure why it was so determined on breaking into my trailer, it wouldn't quit. With the meager .22 I had, I obviously couldn't damage this beast, but the one weapon I owned that may slightly discourage this animal and halt it was. I so lied and waited most of the time for it to reappear. Perhaps it would go away if I shot it in the eye, or something similar. Sometimes it would be sly and use crouching to work right up to my trailer. Other times it would simply execute a bluff charge and vanish. I lied once more and waited, since this critter truly enjoys showing itself at night and would be more active then. This is the evening everything truly started to take off. I still recall it. As it grew dark, I started to hear an odd noise outside, unlike anything else. I could see the moon, bright enough. Considering what I was dealing with in the current circumstances, it was truly a full moon, which in and of itself was unsettling. My .22 was with me completely loaded and ready to go. Though I wasn't very hopeful, maybe I could film this monster in the face and get it gone once and for good. Given that my dogs have always been very nervous while these things are around, their silence was encouraging. I then strolled outdoors to try to identify the source of the commotion I could hear. I then understood I had in the middle of a horrible trap. Then I noticed a set of eyes fixed squarely back at me. At that point, my circumstances changed from moderate to total terror. Then I started to see many sets of eyes all around the trailer. There had to have been minimum 12 of them. And more arrived as my eyes started to change. These animals were dining on all of my dead dogs. That is the reason they had not spoken. I dropped my gun exactly there, hurried back inside the trailer, and locked the door. Given a horde of these things, there was no way that poor tiny rifle could be useful. Not knowing what to do or how I would approach these things, I began to experience a panic attack. These things then became raucous. I listened for howling and growling. They started charging into the trailer, knocked me down, scratched the siding and glass. At this point, they were just playing with me, like a sick monster. These were readily strong and big enough animals that, should they so want, they could break in. Right before they were going to eat me, I felt as though I was a wounded or poisoned mouse surrounded by lots of cats. This was the end of it, I knew, and I would be devoured alive and ripped apart by big werewolf-looking animals. But something strange happened. About 20-30 minutes pass and the noise ceases. Everything outside stilled. Not even could I hear the crickets. It was just dead. I did not catch a drop of sleep and stayed inside my trailer the entire night. I wasn't sure if they were abating me, waiting for me to walk out, giving me a false sense of security while waiting for me. Still, I was not going to go into that trap, not unlike my first time. They most likely were catching and baiting me. Knowing that, the second I would have walked outside that trailer, I would have disappeared, as they would have just grabbed me and bang. Though it had only been 9 hours, I waited in the trailer for what felt like a whole month. I went outside as soon as the morning started to break, walked out, And to my horror, as opposed to what I had expected, there were no dog carcasses. Just ripped chains from where I had them and blood everywhere. It resembled a killing house. I kept roughly 8 dogs around me to provide security. Each had disappeared. Although some would label this following action as extreme, I felt as though I was either dead or seriously close to death. I then simply stopped and abandoned everything I owned in that trailer and hitchhiked to a completely new state, then stayed homeless for some time. All right, I grabbed my wallet, my identity, that kind of crucial information. I decided screw it though, and left the small items I had in that trailer to decay with those beasts. That was only this winter. I want to keep far from anything like those things once more. All right. Look, simply listening to your channel as it is makes me somewhat paranoid already, let alone sending what I want to. That's why I don't want to reveal the precise place this is occurring, but Mississippi is in great need of assistance. People have been discovered mauled to death or just turn up missing completely during the past few years when they were last spotted around a thickly wooded location. You know where this is headed to. And what I have to say is that there most likely was a significant cover-up underway. From all the contacts you most likely get, I'm more than sure you know of this, but things are becoming worse. Surely, how informed am I about this? Since some of the dead thus far have been family of mine. As far as I have been told thus far, it is an unidentified canine animal. Let me say then something right now. Not the size of a damned moose, there is no voracious wolf simply roaming about killing and eating people. The cops are opting to keep everything under wraps since they are aware of exactly what is happening. Though they are doing it, I have no knowledge of appropriate protocol or what they do or how they manage it. And people are being left in the dark on deliberate basis. One should warn people about this kind of behavior. They must be aware that these species are real and existent. Going into the woods by yourself is dangerous nowadays. Not so long ago, just after quarantine started, I came upon an elderly man living nearby. He went fishing in a pond and apparently disappeared. They discovered his fishing pole as well as his bleeding and ripped fishing vest. All set, they came upon it near the thicker bush, about 1.5 miles from the pond. You tell me what transpired there. He would have little motivation to venture farther into the forest, which just results in additional national land. There is a major conspiracy under development here, I am telling you. Though I'm not sure precisely what it is or why they're attempting to hide this entire Dogman thing, it has been really bugging me lately. And I believe it is my place to voice opinions. I want you listeners to know that it is growing worse, hence I hope you will choose to read this to them. If they prefer to be out in the woods, they must be alert and responsive to their surrounds. This ridiculous writing of Dogman off as bogus creepypasta garbage has to end. The general populace rejects the reality, hence people are out here dying and becoming mauled to death by these things. Regarding Bigfoot, I know nothing about him personally and have no encounter with him. From all I know about cryptozoology, they are far more docile, peaceful creatures. But that is aside from the subject. If Bigfoot were out there consuming people, you wouldn't be hearing about a huge unknown predator. Furthermore, I'm not sure if you realize this, but Mississippi is somewhat a hotspot for these species. If you have ever heard of the Mississippi town of Taylor, well, these creatures abound there. Though I know it's also known as the Dogman, they refer to it as the Rougs here. I know they are out there, and I am strong in my understanding of cryptozoology and what these species are. I don't trust a pistol, a magnum, a machine gun will be sufficient to stop these things from murdering you. Hence, you will never find me out there in the woods alone. I'm not sure whether the government or natural or supernatural shapes their birth or assembly. I have no idea. I know they are killing people, hence something has to be done to stop them. Working together, the government and police ensure this occurs. Any word gets out is hush hush. I do not want this to merely be a rant before I call off this. Regarding my 2 family members who passed away, I need go further. They were discovered partially consumed, and what the cops find matches a big canine. Allow me to apologize. Unknown big dog, knowing all you do with all the encounters and stories you get provided, now you tell me what you believe. Please, I'm pleading with you here. You should have your viewers review this. People must be aware of this catastrophic occurrence going on. These nasty things are not being taken care of the way they should be. Hence, right now, I am grieving for the death of my family. Pray for myself, look at me, pay attention. Whether you are exploring or relaxing in the woods, you must be extremely armed to the teeth and constantly watch your back at any one moment. Based on what I know, these are rather advanced predators. They are quite intelligent and masters at concealment. And you are quite naive if you believe you can outsmart them, as they are a, quote, unqualified animal. Still, I appreciate you spending some time to review this.